With Greg Sankey, Commissioner of the SEC. Greg, what was your reaction to the NCAA penalties leveled against Tennessee?
First was, I don't know if relief is the right word, but the understanding that this thing needed to be complete. And I feel that way about every infractions case needing to be finished in a timely manner. So that we got to the finish line was welcome. The second is the recognition by the Committee on Infractions that times are changing, that there's been messaging out of the Constitution Committee about not penalizing uninvolved individuals, and I was pleased that the committee accepted that responsibility to change. The third is the recognition of campus leadership and decision-making to act swiftly, to set expectations about digging in fully. I've felt for a long time, separate from any particular case, that these matters have to be handled in a more timely manner. We have to incentivize and reward campus leadership, particularly when tough decisions are being made, and allow programs to bring these matters to conclusion more quickly.
Was Tennessee's cooperation a message to other schools that you can avert a postseason bowl ban if you do cooperate?
In my view, in reading the report, I think the committee providing clarity around their decision-making on those issues is important. And I think what has happened is we collectively have allowed the notion that if you cooperate, you may be subject to greater penalties than those who fight. And that's just a feeling and observation that's been made over time. And I think it was important for the committee to demonstrate the responsible nature of campus leadership, Chancellor Plowman, but also how that can position yourself better for an outcome from these processes in this modern era.
At the SEC spring meetings, there was a vote to go to an 8-game conference schedule for 1 year. On June the 14th, it was revealed. You want a fair and balanced schedule. Did you feel like that was accomplished?
Very much. In fact, when you go to Destin, we said 8, and there was plenty of criticism. Oh, they're only playing 8. And then when we announced the schedule, and people said, wow, look at these schedules across the board for 16 programs. I do think we met both the rigor expectation. Nobody's complaining about 8 or 9 right now. They're asking. But also I know from an analysis standpoint, a much more narrow band of variance around strength of schedule compared to the old division model. And dating back to 2018, 2019, when our athletics directors asked us to take a fresh look at our scheduling model, on their mind was the competitive disparity inherent in the divisional model. And I do think we achieved the equity and balance that was identified for us up front.
When you do scheduling, do you think it's more important to maintain rivalries and a frequency of playing within the league compared to what's going to happen with the college football playoff?
If only I had just those two factors to evaluate, life would be so wonderful. I will just break them apart and say I do think rivalries are important in this league. They're historic. They go back and draw people in for generations. They're part of the lore. And as we make a decision about 8 or 9 games, the ability to play some of those games of passion on an annual basis is front and center in the dialogue. But the college football playoff, bowl access are also part of the dialogue, and those are two separate issues. So we have a growth coming in the college football playoff. We've done predictive analytics to look at the difference between 8 or 9 games affecting our access. It's really an incremental difference. I don't think it's substantive. When you look at the numbers, now how people feel about it may be very different. And then we have programs that, just getting to the 6 and 6, 7 and 5 level on a regular basis is really important for their program. So all of those are factors that are part of the conversation.
Do you think a long-term schedule, whether it's 8 or 9 games, will be decided this fall?
I go back to the summer of 20, and everybody wanted me to make a decision on playing on their timeline, and we'll use our timeline. My sense is our campus leaders are motivated to move through this decision in a time-efficient manner, which is a bunch of gobbledygook to say, let's not wait till Destin. But I think we've made really good decisions because we slowed ourselves down, Jimmy. I probably told you we were going to make the decision in May of 22 at Destin. We ultimately paused. We learned a lot more and I think made a good decision for 24. what goes back to these annual rivalry games and the multiple number of these annual important rivalry games, that's a pressure point for us to decide sooner rather than later.
In early June, you and 14 school representatives from the SEC went before Congress to visit with them. Were you encouraged by those conversations?
I was. In fact, I walked away from those early June meetings, and I was in Washington, D.C. for 3 days. But I've had any number of conversations. I thought the level of interest was higher. I thought the level of understanding was much higher about some of the reasons we're there. And this is with Democrats and Republicans, with House members, and with Senate members. What we need is a bill to be produced by a committee, get onto the floor for consideration. We've not had a bill move through the committee. As I understand, we're likely to see a healthy amount of activity from some bills being introduced in the next few weeks. I think every one of those is helpful for us, but we do need to move to a bill that can be considered in a committee format, produced by a committee, and then considered on the floor of either the House or the Senate.
Are you confident that that will happen?
Well, it's not for me to predict. I can control that which I can control, which was taking our leadership, our coaches to D.C. for the visit, for the conversations. I can control seeking and having additional conversations. I don't control that timeline, but we're going to try to educate about why this is a need. Hopefully on Monday in my opening remarks, I was able to explain the why congressional action is the venue that resolves the scope of issues we have. And members of Congress are going to determine the timeline.
I've got a couple other questions. Crazy idea. So we saw the Tennessee fans storm the field after the Alabama game. Would it be wise to take the 100 or so security guards and instead of trying to keep 100,000 people from storming the field, escort the opposing teams off the field?
That has been a piece of our conversation this spring, leading into the Destin decision, where we modified the financial accountability, but also set some more clarity around planning for protection of the visiting team. So very much that's on our mind.
One other question. Roy Kramer. I think there's a documentary that's going to run about him. What did Roy Kramer mean to the SEC?
I'm going to answer that in two ways, and I'll just start personally. So Roy, for me, was a giant. He was somebody about whom I read for years, and then I ended up as the commissioner of the Southland Conference in a room, and I can remember being in those rooms with him, like, wow, I'm here with Roy Kramer. He always had a Sony Vaio laptop, I remember. He was ahead of the time from a technology standpoint. Roy was gracious with his time, so I was a young 1AA at the time conference commissioner. He would answer my phone calls, return my phone calls. He actually came and spent a day with our presidents and chancellors and I can remember what he said in those meetings about the uniqueness and the importance of college football, and I wish I'd had a tape recorder to replay that. He was innovative for the conference. He was firm in his beliefs. He was clear with a vision around expanding. Some of that had been set up or discussed in advance of his arriving as commissioner, but he'd been at Vanderbilt as the athletic director, so he was uniquely prepared. Had an understanding of policy down to the minutia to create a conference championship game. It's one that people didn't immediately follow, but everybody has now followed. Was willing to change the postseason. And all of those are examples of leadership that I think still have ripple effects today. And I've enjoyed conversing with him. He's actually the best person to sit by at a football game. He's got his binoculars with him, and he can tell you things that are happening from his perspective as a coach decades ago that is just a general fan or attender you don't see. And lo and behold, his ability to be right in his predictions and describing what's going to happen is pretty high level still.
Greg, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.